Welcome to the Providence College Podcast. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play. If you like what you hear, please review and share with others. Email podcast@providence.edu with questions or comments. Go Friars!
Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. This is part 2 of our conversation that we had with Coach Sam Lopes and Bridget Hillsman. Part 1 was last Monday. If you haven't listened to part 1, I suggest that you do so before listening to this episode. Either way, we hope you enjoy it, and thank you for listening to the Providence College Podcast. And here we are 3.5 weeks from your first practice. So how do you get that philosophy imprinted on your team, specifically your freshmen? What's that process? How much comes from you and how much comes from the older players on the roster?
Yeah, communication. Just consistent communication is what ultimately is going to generate trust, which will build a level of respect and commitment. You know, if you're not communicating, then they're not listening to you. And if you're not communicating and they're not listening to you, they're listening to somebody else. So it's sometimes a broken record. There's obviously, you'd love the ownership to come from within, players that have been here that understand it. Hopefully you've done a good job educating them in terms of how they should communicate and how they should act. We don't do captains, so that presents some challenges because you don't really have 2 or 3 go-to people. You go to everybody on the team. But I'm big on communication, because I just feel communication can really help growth and or problem solve.
That's interesting. So without the normal captaincy structure that a lot of teams have, obviously I would assume that the leaders kind of rise to the top in some respect. So Bridget, how would you describe that process of kind of the team leading itself when coach isn't around, or when there's moments where it's a team thing as opposed to a coach with the team aspect? And in addition to that, I guess, who would you say are some of the best team leaders that you've seen during your time here?
So I think that it's definitely a little bit different not having captains. This was the first team that I've ever been on that doesn't have captains. But I really do like it, just because it's not so much that, everybody can, but everyone is expected to be a leader and, step up and speak out when we're having conversations as a team, rather than just always turning to those same couple of people. So it's kind of, it really is a democracy on our team. The seniors tend to usually kind of kick it off a little, and especially with freshmen, kind of take them under their wing, the upperclassmen. But as soon as the season kind of starts off, people start speaking up, and it really does become this entire team environment where everyone's more open and takes control of the situation. On our team, some of our best leaders aren't even always seniors, which is actually very interesting. I look at the leaders on our team last year, because this coming year, I don't know about the freshmen, but last year as a senior, one of the best leaders on our team, I think, was Katie Day, who was a sophomore last year. I think she just has a really good head on her shoulders, both in terms of soccer and just in terms of, real world situations, making logical decisions. Kristen Shea, she's one of my best friends, but, always comes in thinking, I don't know what she's thinking most of the time, honestly, but...
Who FaceTimed me yesterday, by the way, instead of just regular calling.
But, she always brings important stuff to the table, puts things in perspective, and, makes you really think about what you're going to do, or, what's best for the team. And there's a lot more people on our team that I could speak about, because we really have this kind of open democracy where everyone joins in. But I would say those 2 people are probably the two biggies in my mind.
Yeah, and I would say the idea behind it, I got the concept from Tony DeChico, who recently passed, which was really sad, just because he's known, he belongs on Mount Rushmore for U.S. coaches, but what he gets, what people talk a lot about is just the World Cup wins, but he was just an extraordinary person. And I learned a little bit about him when I worked with him at the Boston Breakers, and everyone's a leader in their own right, and you just got to try to help them embrace that, whether it's through example, through words. Like you look at Kristen Shea and Catherine Zimmerman, two players that were really decorated players, and Zim never really spoke, but she was just an incredible player. Early to practice, staying late, so she led in that way, where Kay Shea had the knack of being patient and then waiting and then saying the right thing at the right time. But for me, the reason not having captains is because I think there's a greater responsibility to help them post-college when they get into the working world or whatever they get involved in. And I want to encourage them to be a leader, however they feel they can. Doesn't mean you have to be vocal in a team meeting, so to speak. And I just feel like it's a responsibility of mine to help 20 some odd people grow in a leadership capacity versus just always 2 or 3. And it tends to be the 2 or 3 rising seniors or juniors. And I really want a voice to come from an authentic group and encourage whether you're a freshman or a senior. So it was a interesting idea that was presented to the team that I think even they were like, wait a minute, what do you mean we're not going to have captains type of thing? Even we didn't have team rules. Even some of those people were like, what do you mean we don't have rules? Because you touched on it, Matt. Like I want to build a culture that the culture is the motivation. The culture drives the boss versus, well, I'm down to strike 2 with coach and, I think if you build it right, sky's the limit.
I can believe it. And you also, that puts more on your plate, though. When you don't have rules and you don't have team captains, because it makes everything contextual, right? So there's no 3-strike policy or, hey, you're late to the practice, you're late, so this is what happens, right? By making it bureaucratic, it can streamline the process. By making it less bureaucratic, maybe more fair, but obviously more time on your plate in terms of figuring all the context out for every situation.
Yeah, it's a process that you've got to constantly educate them and hope that they believe and trust in. I just really challenge my players a lot.
In what way?
Well, just for example, if I'll give you 2 examples, one playing, one from an academic perspective. If you have a forward who isn't scoring, then you just present questions about why are you not scoring, and then you let them generate the reasons they feel they're not scoring. And then that stems a conversation of, okay, what are some solutions to help you address that? And then what's the process of that, right? If you played a game last weekend and you had 4 shots and only 2 hit the frame and you didn't score any goals, well, what's the process leading up to this week where maybe you can work on a thing or 2 that if you get those 4 shots, maybe you get 3 on frame and you score a goal. Same thing with school. You go through a process where you have X amount of exams and you prepare, you go to class, you sit in the front row, you take notes, and all of a sudden you feel confident, you sit down, you go take the exam, and you get a B+. And is it blaming people, or do you sit there and assess, okay, what was the process leading up to this, and how can I learn from it, tweak it, and maybe now in the second exam you get an A-. You get a 3.0 in the fall, try to get a 3.2 in the spring. You scored 4 goals freshman year, can you score 6 goals the next year? And I use those 2 comparisons because the games and exams are the same. The field is our classroom. I'm, in essence, the teacher. The players are the students. You're teaching them some material, and on game day, you sit back and you hope they can apply it. And there's a level of confidence, and there's been enough repetition where they're comfortable to execute enough plays. Same thing with going to take an exam. So that's really, the way we try to go about it. And that kind of ties into the no rules,
right?
In terms of, you talked about it, right? You have, let's say, soccer, academics, and social. Well, I want them to enjoy their experience, but how they choose to live their life as a student athlete is probably going to have to be vastly different than the regular student. And what you do, when you do, how you do it, when you look yourself in the mirror based on those decisions and actions, are you really proud of what you see? And is it a good representation of yourself, your family, and the program? And I think we just always revisit that, and it just challenges them to think and grow, and hopefully they learn from other people's mistakes. They minimize their mistakes, because people are going to make mistakes. That's just the reality of it. It's, Coach White once said, hopefully the mistake was something that you wrote with a pencil, not a pen.
That's a great line.
Right? Oh, Coach White I'm telling you, he's got some of the best. But think, it's the point is obviously, okay, you made a mistake writing something out, you can go erase it. But if you write it with a pen, it's permanent. Right. So, and I think in the 3 years, we haven't had any issues, and we've seen a lot of growth, and really proud to see what some of the alums are doing that played for us. And I would like to think they feel a little bit of what the culture has helped them in the everyday life post Providence College.
Right. So we got year 4 right around the corner.
Yeah.
So August 2nd, you got the first practice. 2.5 weeks later, first game. So how do you prioritize what you're going to do during practices between getting the team integrated, ready to play 11 on 11 versus skill development versus figuring out which lineups work well with each other, which players,
Sure.
in little, not 11 on 11, but, little 2 or 3 person units on the side of a field or whatever. How do you prioritize how you practice plan and figure out how much time you spend or allocate in each area?
Yeah. You got to be a bit flexible, because there's the unknown of how they're going to arrive, just from a level of fitness, health, who's done what. So you really spend the first couple of days just learning a little bit about that. But without really indulging too much, because kind of don't want to share too much what we do. But we try to isolate based on when the season ended the previous year up until the next fall with all the returners. You try to learn about, okay, what is the potential of this team now that you've had some exiting seniors that are not with you? Because every team is going to have a different identity. They're going to have different strengths, different weaknesses. Playing styles may have to vary a bit. And then while you're doing that, you're trying to forecast, okay, the freshmen that are coming in, the new players, I should say, because you may have some transfers. What do you feel are their qualities, and how would that mesh? And then the first few days, you're isolating some key topics that you think are going to be important, that you think this particular team's identity is going to have to be really good, whether it's transition to attack or set defending or possession or finishing. So as a staff, what we've been doing over the last few months is just isolating a handful of topics that we think will be important to be successful, the DNA of this particular team. The first few days we'll get after it, and we'll see how that goes. And then we may have to tweak a thing or two based on what we're seeing, health, level of fitness. May have to decrease the load, increase the load. You don't have a lot of time. That's the challenge with our sport in the fall season. We don't have the luxury of a winter or spring sport where you can use that fall semester. And there's all these other things you got to take into account.
Especially for freshmen.
That's exactly what I was just going to touch upon. It's just, the freshmen are going through quite a few transitions because we're the first team. So there's the anxiety, they're leaving home and maybe some homesickness, and now they were maybe the star in their team and now they're just one of. So there's that whole transition. And then all the teams start getting on campus. So there's the transition of interacting with other teams. Then school starts. You got to deal with competing and going to class. And that's why you always hear freshmen tend to burn out and crash at some point. So we've got to manage that too. And for me, less is more as long as there's quality. You don't need to be training every day. You don't need to be doing these rigorous double sessions every day. Sometimes 2 days off is a lot more beneficial than 2 days of training. And that's just where you got to get a pulse and a gauge of the team. But it's got to be flexible, because you don't know how things are going to evolve.
And Bridget, from your perspective, from the player's perspective, I say your former perspective as a player, now that you're a coach on the staff, what is it like from an exhaustion standpoint? Progressing through preseason, and then the season starts up, mid to late August, in terms of physical exhaustion and the mental exhaustion.
Yeah, I have never done a preseason with Coach. So my preseason was with another coach, but just going through it and being with the girls and everything, you definitely do get tired. The girls are tired. It's hot. Their legs are sore. But, I think that the past couple of years, coach has really refined how we've done it. Every year it's a little bit different, between, days off and recovery methods and, trips as a team just to kind of get away. But I think we've really struck a balance. I think we've struck a good balance, especially last year. The girls came in not nearly as sore, but I felt like fitness-wise, we were probably better off than we had been the previous year. So hopefully this year it's a little better too.
She's already speaking like a coach.
I think preseason's been good. I think it's kind of really set us up in the past couple of years to do pretty well in season, and hopefully this year it'll be even better.
Yeah, and I think the reality is they're going to be sore. It's between us and sports medicine and the strength conditioning staff. It's really managing the soreness. Can it stay in that good sore? Once you switch gears and you're over across that line and you're in that bad sore, now you're running a risk of injury. And a lot of it is that communication piece we talked about. We just really got to do a good job listening to the team. We got to do a good job explaining what we're doing. And sometimes listening to them where maybe they're saying a day off will be beneficial. If you've got the culture that you've built and you know that it's authentic, the conversations you're having, they're being real with you, and you've got to listen to them. We have a very small window to get it right. We don't have this elongated season, so we've got a couple of weeks to kind of learn a little bit about each other, and then we just hope we can take the lessons we learn, apply them, have more solutions than problems, and when that final whistle blows, hopefully we've put a good season in place.
Now, basically the season breaks down to first half of the season is non-conference, second half of the season is Big East play. So how do you approach the non-conference schedule? Do you view it, obviously you want to play well in every game, ideally you'd like to win, but how much do you balance kind of playing the best you possibly can versus looking forward to Big East play and saying, hey, in order to be the best team that we can be in Big East play, we need XYZ to happen, which might mean that you maybe don't play your best against Harvard. It might mean you bring some players along.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say it's changed 3 years later going into our fourth season than it did my initial season. Some of the things are still the same. Early on, we're probably spreading out a lot of the minutes of players, even if they're fit enough, because we want them to have as much fuel in the tank at the end of the season. So we tend to play a lot of kids early on that are ready for it. I would say in the beginning of my journey here, especially the first year, halfway through the second, but in the first year, the non-conference was almost an extension of the preseason. I was using that more to still learn about ourselves because we didn't have an off season. So those first 2 or 3 games were really preseason mentality games for me. And if we won them, great. If we didn't win them, it was okay because we didn't have much of a spring season with each other. Going into the fourth season and transitioning last year, the non-conference is really important now for us, just based on how I've constructed the schedules. We've started to play much tougher teams that have NCAA implications on them. So we don't have the luxury to go into a non-conference game and just say, well, if we win, great. We have to try to learn about ourselves and balance in winning the game. But it can't be, we can't win the game at the expense of growing as a team and not peaking at the right time. So it's a balancing act because we obviously, Big East is critical for us. So now going into year 4, right out of the gate, that first game at the JMU Invitational Tournament, those are super important games where maybe 3 years ago, the result wasn't all that important. We still have to learn about each other because you can win a game and not really take steps forward. So it's a bit of a balance act. And I think the biggest thing that I like is I think the team understands that now. The culture's gotten to a point where maybe 4 years ago that wasn't the mentality. But I think 4 years later, I think they do understand that mentality. And it's showing with what the conversations I'm having with some of their training habits during the summer, which is going to help them.
Now, in the past, Bridget, as the lineup starts to get constricted throughout the season and maybe, coach starts focusing more on certain players rather than others as you move into, later September into October, how important is the team leadership within the team play in terms of kind of soothing the feelings or hurt emotions that can go along with seeing your role reduced or playing time going down?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the whole leadership thing, where it's kind of everyone has a role, and I definitely learned that. I know a lot of people on our team have had to learn that. That you got to be a leader no matter what your role is. And so when you're not seeing the field a ton, you still got to step up, and everyone's going to be there for you. It's not about who's playing, who's not. It's just more about maybe we should get out and practice for an extra 20 minutes, where you can always find those 2 or 3 people who play the same position who will go out with you, or chat with your roommate about what more you could be doing off the field. So yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say first season with Coach, it was definitely a little bit different than it is now, where playing time was much more of a discussion and a little bit more cutthroat. Not that it was ever horrible, but people were used to playing, and if you weren't playing, then you were really questioning it. Whereas now, I think everyone understands that there's more of a method to the madness. And if you're doing the work off the field and, putting in the time and, doing the best you can for the team, then you're going to be rewarded in some way. Maybe it's not the way that you hope, but you're going to be rewarded for it.
Right. And then before we get the season, you got your prospect camp. Right, so in 2 weeks. So what does that entail? And then we can get going. But I just want to touch on that before we head out.
Yeah, so we run these prospect clinics annually. I think we're up to 4 now. We try to do one every season. And we have our 2-day prospect clinic coming at the end of July. Within the NCAA rules, you're allowed to have prospects visit the campus, put them through training sessions, educate them a little bit about the process, and so we'll have kids coming from everywhere, and we'll be able to spend a couple of days with them on campus. I think it serves 2 purposes. It allows us to learn a little bit about them in a different setting. When you go watch them, you're watching them play, but when you get to coach them, you get to see how they are to attention to detail and coachability, and how they work with different teammates, and then from their perspective, they get to get a feel for being on campus, playing on a gorgeous stadium like Anderson Stadium. And so that's at the end of this month, and it's been a great event. We're going into our 3rd year running it, and anyone who's obviously interested can just visit thefriars.com. And we don't take an abundance of kids, because just like the environment that's on Providence, we like to keep it a small number so it's a little bit more intimate, and we can learn about them, they can learn about us.
Okay, and I guess last thing is, if people are interested in learning more about you, I know you're active on social media, you and your team.
Yeah, we have different handles, right? Bridget's going to be in charge of those. Yep. So going forward, if you don't like any of the content, you can send her an email. But we have, for Twitter, we have PC_women's soccer. Same name for Instagram. I have my Twitter handle, which is PC_Coach Lopes. I think those social media platforms are great, because what we try to do is we try to get people who follow us to learn about who we are outside of just what is a press release on Friars.com. And we do a lot of things like take over and give them a snapshot of what it's like to travel with us and stuff. So I think social media, although can be bad at times, I think there's so much good within. We try to promote all the good that's happening with us.
That's great. Well, thank you for joining us, and good luck this coming season.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having us.
Thanks.